Under this fractional reserve scheme, we inevitably become debt slaves to a ruling class of financial elite, not because they are better or smarter than anyone else, but because they have rigged the system to benefit themselves at the expense of most people on the planet.
The U.S. governmental shutdown, what is it? A temporary disorder or the symptom of a serious disease? Budget talks are tough in any state as economies struggle to stay afloat among the stormy waves of the global crisis. But is there somebody who benefits from this troubled state of affairs, or maybe even controls the winds?
In the reality of the global economic slowdown, money still makes the world go round. In the circles of vice and lust, political maneuvering and corruption. Is money the source of all evil, or just those who control it? Are banks there to keep the people's wealth, or to steal it? Can any government be called honest? Who runs the economic and political scenes?
So when you look at the concept of the debt, it's much more than just borrowing money, right? It makes you controllable. For example, in the case of the U.S., who controls it? You mean the big corporations or countries like China and Japan who control large chunks of the debt?
Well, that's a very good question, and fortunately, some mathematicians at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology have given us a very precise answer. They did a study of who owns and controls the companies on the capital markets, 43,000 companies. And they found out that there's a secret super entity, they call it, that owns 60% of the earnings every year and 40% of the assets. They did this by putting the same people on the boards of these companies. So they have 10 times the economic power that they're entitled to. And they thought no one would catch them at it. This is a huge conglomerate that has been rigging the LIBOR prices. It's been rigging all of the commodities prices. It's been trading in the securities markets with insider information. It has got to be stopped. It also bought up all the media and has been lying to people deliberately.
What is
going to stop.
Proper relationship? What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
We have a private bank that prints money on behalf of the Treasury. The Federal Reserve prints money on a debt-based system which creates scarcity. But it puts a group of insiders in a position of having access to all the data about the economy when we don't. So you have a small group of bankers who understand the data on how the money works in the economy, and it gives them the ability to print money in a way that the insiders are protected and everybody else is drained.
So the government shutdown, is the move on the part of the Republicans justified? Is fighting off Obamacare worth all this mess?
I think there's something more going on behind the scenes. A lot more, actually.
What do you mean?
Well, there is a terrible currency problem. We're on the verge of a currency war. The Federal Reserve is printing dollars like there's no tomorrow, and if they keep going, the rest of the world is not going to accept them. As it is, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have decided that they're going to finance the trade among these countries with offsets and pay for the difference in gold. And
but
this
how is that connected
the right
with the
move
shutdown,
for them,
though?
because the U.S. Congress has been fighting with the presidency because the presidency has been in total contempt. And the highest legal officer of the United States government has also been in contempt of Congress in fighting this international corruption that is ruining the dollar as an international reserve currency.
So how come if you or I make up money, it's called counterfeiting? But if the banks do it, it's increasing the money supply. How did the banks get this power? This is Jekyll Island, where in 1910, representatives from the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Morgans, and other private bankers gathered, secretly, to draft the legislation that would create the Federal Reserve. Ed Griffin literally wrote the book on what happened at Jekyll Island.
I mean, raising a debt ceiling once or twice a year, what's the problem?
The problem is actually when you talk about debt, that our currency is financed by debt. Our currency is issued by the Federal Reserve instead of the Treasury, it's unconstitutional. When the Federal Reserve System was instituted in 1913, most of the Congress was on break. They sneaked that legislation through. So the debt is there simply for those bankers to put an interest on it and have it grow and compound every year. The debt is a fabrication. It's probably should be repudiated, but it can't be repudiated until you've looked at all of the
Catherine Austin
implications.
Fitts is an expert on this issue. She was an Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President George Bush Sr., and then an advisor to the Clinton administration.
Let's set up a game of Monopoly, and you want to buy Park Place. What I can continually do is just print money, give myself more money, lower the value of your money by printing more. No matter how hardworking you are or how successful you are, I can always end up buying you for free.
Economists have been predicting the dollar will fall ever since the crisis in 2008, but the government has managed to keep it afloat.
Well, not for long. If you look at what's going on in the gold and other precious metals markets, silver as well, we're headed towards something called permanent gold backwardation. That means that there's a loss in confidence in the fiat currencies that are issued by those private banks. They like to consider themselves as public banks, but they're really owned by private entities. And these currencies are about to crash because they're valueless. That's what always happens to paper currencies that aren't backed by assets.
But if a financial collapse happens, let's say, right, will gold be of any use? I mean, if there's a shortage of food, and look at the world today, the biggest problem we're facing is the clean drinking water. What's gold going to do about that? Well,
first of all, I think that we're going to manage to get our act together. I'm not expecting a collapse. A very accurate game theory model is showing that we're going to manage to make a transition in a very smooth way. Maybe there'll be a few fits and starts, but I think most of the countries of the world are in favor of working together and not to have a collapse. The only thing that you're seeing is some of these crooks haven't figured out, they haven't seen the writing on the wall. They haven't seen that we understand that there's a way to work together and avoid these problems, which are definitely avoidable.
So just to answer my question, the government is controlled by the conglomerate or the corporations rather than countries that are up and coming economically, right? So why haven't these corporations or conglomerate, as you call it, been caught? Why is nothing changing?
That's the whole point about it. They like to think they're in control, but they're not. They're not above the law. And we citizens know exactly what they're up to. We've been working on this problem. All of the governors of the states have been working on this terrible corruption. So have the attorneys general. So have the sheriffs. And it's not going to continue. The American people are taking back their government, and they are stopping this terrible corruption.
Central banks are banking cartels which have gone into partnership with the respective governments in the countries where they operate. And they've been given monopolistic power over the creation of the nation's money supply. That's what the politicians handed to them as a gift, you might say, for the partnership. Now, in return, what did the bankers do for the politicians? They promised to create money out of nothing, now that they've got this legal power to do it anytime the government needs it.
And since 2008, we've witnessed the greatest fake money printing run in recorded history. This financial sleight of hand disguises the costs, hides who's to blame, and leaves us as debt slaves working to pay off the bill.